My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my purse right there on the precinct floor. Officer Miller took 3 steps back, his hand hovering instinctively over his holster, eyes wide as saucers. "Where did you get that, ma'am? That is—" His voice cracked before he could even finish the sentence. I couldn't get a single word out. 2 hours ago, I was sitting in the waiting room at Dr. Ramsey's medical center, nervous about my blood work results, when I felt that movement inside my brown leather bag. It was a movement that shouldn't have been there, a movement that was about to change my life forever. And it all started because I ignored what I saw that morning. Valerie, my daughter-in-law, digging through my things while I pretended to fix my hair in the mirror. I should have stopped her. I should have confronted her right then and there. But I had spent 3 years biting my tongue, smiling when I wanted to scream, staying silent when I should have spoken up. 3 years building a castle of silence that finally collapsed when I least expected it, in the most terrifying way possible. Let me take you back a few hours to the exact moment everything blew up. That October morning dawned cold over my house in Beacon Hill. I've lived alone since my husband Robert died of a massive heart attack 22 years ago, back when our son Mark was barely 18. I raised that boy all by myself, working double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, denying myself any luxuries, sacrificing my own dreams so he could study architecture. And he did it. He graduated with honors. He got an excellent job. He fell in love. But before I go on, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps me know you support me and enjoy my stories, and comment down below which city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Valerie appeared in our lives like a spring storm, beautiful, sweeping, impossible to ignore. Mark met her at an art exhibition 4 years ago. She was a gallery owner, sophisticated, with that air of superiority that some people mistake for elegance. From day one, I knew something didn't fit. A mother always knows. It's an instinct that lives in your gut, a primitive whisper warning you of danger. But Mark was blinded, hopelessly in love, and I stayed quiet. Because that's what mothers do, right? We stay quiet so we don't lose our children. They got married 2 years later in an intimate ceremony, just close family. I paid for half of it, even though my pension barely covered my own expenses. Valerie never said thank you. During the reception, I heard her telling a cousin, "It's a pity Mark's mother is so simple. But hey, you can't have everything." Those words stuck in my chest like broken glass, but I kept smiling. I kept pouring champagne. I kept being invisible. After the wedding, the visits became sporadic. Mark always had excuses. "We're busy, Mom." "Valerie has a work dinner." "We'll call you." The Sunday lunches that used to be sacred became occasional, then rare, then non-existent. And when they finally did come over, it was Valerie who dominated the conversation, who decided when they stayed and when they left, who looked at my small apartment with barely disguised disdain. 6 months ago, the situation got worse. Mark lost a major project at his architecture firm. Valerie, as I found out later, had racked up debts buying art they couldn't afford, maintaining a facade of success that was crumbling in private. They came to ask me for money, not a loan, although they called it that, a temporary help of $15,000. It was everything I had saved for a hip surgery I urgently needed. I gave it to them. I haven't seen a dime back. Since then, something changed in Valerie's eyes when she looked at me. Before, it was contempt. Now, it was something darker, calculating, as if she were measuring, evaluating, planning. I started noticing little things, objects of mine disappearing when they visited. A gold bracelet Robert gave me, a ring with a small diamond, family photos. I never said anything. What could I say? Accuse my son's wife of robbing me? Mark would never believe me. That morning, they had slept at my place because they were fumigating their apartment. I woke up early, nervous about my 10 o'clock doctor's appointment. My blood tests had come back irregular, and Dr. Ramsey wanted to see me personally. While I was getting ready in my room, I left my purse in the living room on the sofa. It was just for a moment. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, I saw the scene reflected in the hallway mirror. Valerie was leaning over my bag, her hands deep inside, moving things around, looking for something. Her face held an expression of cold, almost clinical concentration. Mark was in the kitchen making coffee, oblivious to everything. My heart was beating so loud I thought he'd hear it. But she didn't look up. She put something inside my purse, something wrapped in a dark cloth, and then closed the bag carefully, as if nothing had happened. I should have yelled at her. I should have walked in and confronted her in front of my son. But fear paralyzed me. The fear of creating a conflict, of losing Mark for good, of confirming what I already knew, that my daughter-in-law hated me and my son wouldn't defend me. So I walked quietly back to my room. I waited a few minutes and came out feigning normalcy. I made them breakfast. Valerie smiled at me with that fake smile I knew so well. "Thanks, Beatrice. You're so good to us." Then they left. Mark kissed my forehead distractedly. Valerie didn't even look at me on her way out. I grabbed my purse, locked the door, and headed to the medical center, ignoring the strange weight I felt in the bag, ignoring the voice in my head screaming at me to check it, ignoring every instinct warning me of danger. And now I was here, in this cold precinct, watching 2 more officers approach with grave expressions, while the contents of my purse, contents I hadn't put there, contents Valerie had slipped in with expert hands, lay on the desk as evidence of a crime I hadn't committed. My life had just turned into a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. "Ma'am, I need you to tell me exactly what happened this morning, from the beginning." Officer Miller's voice was firm, but not hostile. Not yet. I collapsed into the plastic chair, my legs shaking, my mind trying to process the impossible. How do you explain to a stranger that your own daughter-in-law tried to destroy you? How do you describe years of silent poison leading up to this moment? "I didn't put that there," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It was her, my daughter-in-law. This morning I saw her. She put something in my bag when I wasn't looking." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. That universal look that says, another paranoid old lady blaming someone else. I knew it well. I had seen it in Mark's eyes every time I tried to talk to him about Valerie. To understand how I got to this point, I have to go back to the beginning, to when Mark was just a scared kid who had just lost his father, and I was a 42-year-old widow who didn't know how she was going to survive the next day. Robert died on a Tuesday, a massive heart attack while driving home. The car smashed into a utility pole. It was instantaneous, they told me, as if that alleviated the pain. Mark had just turned 18. We had planned a party. We had bought a cake. Instead of birthday candles, we lit votive candles at a funeral. The night after the burial, I found my son sitting on the balcony, staring at nothing. "What are we going to do, Mom?" he asked me with that little boy voice that still surfaced when he was scared. I didn't have an answer. We had debts, a mortgage, and Mark had just been accepted into architecture school. He could have dropped out. Many did. But I looked him in the eyes, those green eyes identical to Robert's, and I said, "You are going to study, you are going to be an architect, and I am going to make sure of that." I picked up double shifts at the hospital. I worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, 6 days a week. My feet bled inside my shoes. My back became a map of chronic pain. But Mark studied. He graduated. He got a job at one of the best firms in Boston. I did it. I saved him. For 20 years, we were a team. We had dinner together on Sundays. He told me about his projects. I told him stories from the hospital. We laughed. We supported each other. We were enough for each other. Until Valerie showed up. The first time Mark told me about her, his eyes shined differently. "Mom, I met someone special," he told me with a smile I hadn't seen since before his father died. My heart swelled with joy and terror simultaneously. Joy because my son had found love. Terror because I knew everything was about to change. Valerie Suarez, 32 years old, 5 years younger than Mark, contemporary art gallery owner. She came from an upper-class family that had fallen on hard times, something I learned later. Her father had been a businessman until a bad deal left him bankrupt. She grew up with the memory of luxury and the bitterness of having lost it. That had turned her into someone obsessed with appearances, with regaining that lost status at any cost. When I met her, she arrived dressed like she was on a runway. Perfect makeup, designer clothes, or at least very good knockoffs. That scent of expensive perfume that left a trail. She extended her hand to me reluctantly, as if touching me were a sacrifice. "Charmed, Mrs. Beatrice," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She evaluated my apartment in 3 seconds. The walls that needed painting, the furniture that was old but clean, the dishes that were chipped but cared for. And in her gaze, I read the verdict: insufficient. During that first dinner, she talked only about herself, about her gallery, which actually belonged to her boss, about the famous artist she knew from casual mentions at cocktail parties, about her trips funded by credit cards that were already in the red. Mark watched her, spellbound. I saw the performance behind the facade, but who listens to a mother when love is blind? The engagement lasted 2 years. 2 years in which my son visited less and less. 2 years in which Valerie found subtle ways to remind me of my place. Mark deserves something better, don't you think? When we have our house, it will be completely different from this. It's a shame you couldn't give Mark the opportunities he deserves. Poison, distilled drop by drop. And I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. Because I was afraid that if I spoke, if I told the truth about what I saw, Mark would choose Valerie, and I would lose him forever. Now, sitting in this precinct, watching them catalog evidence that could send me to prison, I understood the terrible price of that silence. Officer Miller was talking to me, but his words arrived distorted, as if I were underwater. "Mrs. Beatrice, are you listening to me? We need to take your formal statement. This is very serious." Serious. What an insufficient word to describe the abyss I was in. I nodded mechanically, trying to organize my thoughts, to find the exact moment everything started to crumble. The wedding was the breaking point. After that intimate ceremony where I spent my savings and received barely a mumbled thanks, things changed with terrifying speed. At first, it was small things, so subtle I doubted my own perception, like when Valerie changed the Sunday lunchtime without consulting me. "It's just that we have yoga at that time, Beatrice. We'll come later." Later turned into the evening, then into maybe next week, then into nothing. When I called Mark, Valerie answered. "He's busy. He'll call you back," she'd say with that sugary voice that hit a 0. He never called back. When I insisted, when I dared to dial a 3rd time in a day because I needed to talk to my son, she would sigh audibly. "Beatrice, Mark has a lot of work. You can't be calling all the time. You seem desperate." Desperate. That word haunted me for months. Was it desperation to want to talk to my only son? Was it desperation to miss the Sundays that had been sacred for 20 years? I started questioning myself. Maybe Valerie was right. Maybe I was the typical meddling mother-in-law they make fun of in sitcoms. Maybe I should give them space. So I backed off. I stopped calling so often. I waited for them to seek me out. Sometimes 2 weeks went by without news. Once a whole month passed. When Mark finally showed up, he didn't come just to visit. He came because they needed something, for me to store some boxes, to lend them the vacuum, to sign some papers Valerie needed for a procedure. He never explained what procedure. I never asked. Visits became transactions. They arrived, took what they needed, and left. Mark would kiss my forehead distractedly, his mind already out the door. "Love you, Mom," he'd say, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed, like a script Valerie had made him memorize to keep up appearances. And then the darker subtleties began. Valerie started making comments about my house every time they came. "What is that smell?" she'd say, wrinkling her nose, even though I had cleaned for hours. "Beatrice, don't you think this place is too big for you alone? You could sell and move into something more appropriate for your age." Appropriate. As if 64 years turned me into someone who should be stored in a closet, invisible, silent, small. One day, I found Valerie going through my closets. "Just looking for towels," she said with a smile, but I knew she was lying. I had seen how her eyes cataloged every object, every drawer, calculating value, looking for opportunities. 2 weeks later, Robert's gold bracelet disappeared, the one I never took off, the one I left in the bathroom while I showered. When I asked if they had seen it, Valerie opened her eyes with studied innocence. "A bracelet? No, Beatrice. Are you sure you didn't lose it? At your age, memory starts to fail. At your age. Those 3 words became Valerie's mantra to discredit me. At your age, you shouldn't live alone. At your age, it's normal to get confused. At your age, you should think about the future. As if my age were a disease, an automatic disqualification of my lucidity, my autonomy, my worth as a person. Mark said nothing. My son, whom I had raised to be strong and fair, had become a man who looked the other way. When I tried to talk to him alone, Valerie always found a way to interrupt. "Honey, we have to go. Mark, I need you here." "Babe, aren't you going to tell your mom about the project?" And he obeyed like a trained dog. The invasion was complete when Valerie started making decisions for me. Without asking, she told Mark I needed help with my finances. One day they arrived with bank papers. "Just sign here, Mom. It's so I can help you pay your bills. Don't worry about anything." I signed because I wanted to believe him, because I needed to believe my son still loved me, that he still cared. 2 months later, I discovered they had emptied my savings account. "It was a loan, Beatrice. We'll pay you back," Valerie said without blinking. They never did. The isolation was perfect. My few friends stopped visiting because Valerie had told them I wasn't feeling well and needed rest. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, told me later that Valerie had suggested she shouldn't bother me so much with her visits. "Poor Beatrice is very bad with her nerves," she had said. Everyone started treating me like I was fragile, like I was on the brink of madness, like anything could break me. And now, sitting in front of this officer looking at me with growing suspicion, I understood that everything had been calculated. Every move, every word, every humiliation had been part of a plan. "There have to be witnesses," Officer Miller said finally, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Someone who can corroborate that you saw your daughter-in-law manipulating your purse." I shook my head slowly, feeling tears starting to pool. There were no witnesses. Valerie had made sure of that. She always made sure of that. The last 6 months had been a nightmare of red flags I ignored out of cowardice, out of misguided love, out of that paralyzing fear of losing Mark for good. Now those signals flashed in my memory like emergency lights arriving too late. Everything intensified after I lent them the $15,000. Valerie changed. Before, she treated me with contempt disguised as courtesy. Afterward, she started treating me with something worse, familiarity, as if the money had given her rights over me, over my life, over my house. She started showing up without warning, ringing the doorbell at 7 in the morning. I was passing by and thought I'd visit. She never passed by here. Her route to work was in the opposite direction. She'd walk in without waiting for an invitation, pace around my house like it was hers, open drawers looking for a glass of water, go through my mail to help you get organized. Once I found her in my bedroom looking at the photos of Robert and Mark I kept on my nightstand. "You're so nostalgic, Beatrice," she said, without a shred of warmth. Living in the past isn't healthy. But what disturbed me most were the conversations I overheard. One afternoon, they were in the living room while I was making coffee in the kitchen. The walls of my old apartment are thin. Valerie's voice came through clear. "It can't last much longer. At her age and with those irregular test results, it's a matter of time." Mark murmured something I couldn't catch. She continued, "And when that happens, this place will be ours. We can sell it and finally get out of debt. It's the perfect solution." My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the coffee pot. Were they waiting for my death? Planning it? No, I told myself. I'm exaggerating. I'm paranoid. At your age, the mind plays tricks, remember? Valerie's words echoed in my head, but the signals continued. My medications started disappearing. I left them in the bathroom cabinet, and the next day, pills were missing. At first, I thought I had messed up the dosage, but then I found the bottle of my blood pressure medication empty, even though I had bought it just 3 days prior. When I mentioned this to them during a visit, Valerie looked at me with that expression of fake concern I knew so well. "Beatrice, that sounds serious. Maybe you should see a neurologist. Memory problems at your age can be a sign of something bigger." Objects didn't just disappear. They appeared. Things I hadn't bought, hadn't used. A bottle of whiskey in my kitchen when I don't drink alcohol. boxes of pills that weren't mine. Once I found an envelope with cash hidden inside a book. $5,000 I definitely hadn't put there. When I found it, I felt a chill. It was like someone was setting a stage, building a narrative. Valerie's visits became more frequent and more unsettling. She always had an excuse. She needed to use my computer because hers had broken down. She needed to store boxes in my basement because they were remodeling. She needed to review some documents at my desk. I let her because I didn't know how to say no without creating a major conflict. And every time she left, I felt like something had changed in my house, like she was moving pieces on a board I couldn't see. Mark wasn't Mark anymore. The few times I saw him alone, stolen moments when Valerie went to the bathroom or took a call, he looked exhausted, defeated. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes. He had lost weight. Once I tried to ask him if everything was okay. "Mom, don't start." He cut me off with a harshness I didn't recognize in him. "Valerie is right, you're too nosy." And I fell silent. Once again, I fell silent. Officer Miller was still waiting for my formal statement, but before I continue with what happened at the precinct, I need you to understand how I discovered the truth. Because the truth, when it finally arrived, was like a tsunami that wiped out everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law, about my son, about the nightmare my life had become. It was 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday afternoon. Valerie had come alone, which was unusual. Mark was out of state supervising a site. She showed up with that smile I now recognize as her battle mask. "I need to leave a box here, Beatrice, just for a few days. It's gallery material, very delicate." I nodded. I always nodded. She brought a medium-sized box down from the car and left it in my guest room, the one that no longer received guests because Valerie had taken charge of scaring everyone away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the urgency with which Valerie had left that box unsettled me. At 3 a.m, with insomnia buried in my bones, I decided to look. Just a peek, I told myself, just to calm this anxiety that's consuming me. The box wasn't sealed. Inside were folders, many folders, bank documents, statements. And when I started reading, I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. Valerie wasn't a gallery owner. She never had been. She had worked as an assistant in a gallery for 6 months, 4 years ago, before meeting Mark. She was fired for inventory irregularities. Everything else had been a lie. The gallery she talked about was owned by an ex-boyfriend who had kicked her out of his life after discovering she had forged his signature on several documents. But that wasn't the worst part. Among the papers, I found statements from online casinos, debts totaling over $250,000, loans from loan sharks with 40% monthly interest, maxed-out credit cards, and most chilling of all, printed WhatsApp conversations where she discussed with someone named Matthew about how to speed up the process and secure the inheritance before the old hag blows it. The old hag. I was the old hag in those conversations. My hands were shaking so bad the papers fell to the floor. I kept reading, unable to stop, even though every line was a punch to the gut. There was a detailed plan, a timeline. Valerie had investigated my finances, my will, the value of my apartment. She knew exactly how much my death would be worth to them. $3 million between the apartment in Beacon Hill, a life insurance policy I had forgotten I had, and a small inheritance my sister had left me years ago. Before I continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in their shoes. Don't click out of the video, because what comes next is going to give you goosebumps. I found emails, dozens of emails between Valerie and this Matthew guy, who turned out to be an unscrupulous lawyer specializing in resolving complex inheritance situations. In one of the emails dated just 2 months ago, Valerie wrote, "The problem is the old bat is healthy. The tests came back fine except for minor anemia. We need another approach. What if we show she's mentally unstable? We could get a declaration of incapacity. I've been leaving evidence, meds that aren't hers, money hidden in weird places. I've talked to her neighbors about her forgetfulness. They already think she's senile." Senile. She had spent months building a narrative that I was losing my mind. The missing objects, the things that appeared, the comments about my age. It had all been deliberate. A perfect setup. But there was more. Much more. In another folder, I found documents about Mark. My son had lost that major project not because of incompetence, as Valerie had made him believe, but because she had sabotaged his work. She had sent emails from Mark's account with deliberate errors. She had canceled important meetings pretending to be him. She had leaked confidential information to the competition, all to keep him vulnerable, dependent, desperate for money. And then I found the insurance. Valerie had taken out a life insurance policy on Mark 8 months ago. $2 million. She was the sole beneficiary. My blood ran cold. How far was this woman willing to go? At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a plastic bag, was something that made me throw up right there in the guest room. Bottles of dangerous medications, digitalis, sedatives, and a handwritten list of my daily routine. Drinks coffee at 7 a.m., alone, leaves balcony door open. Meds in unlocked bathroom, goes for a walk Thursdays at 9 a.m., always the same route. She was planning to kill me. My daughter-in-law was planning to murder me and make it look like an accident or the suicide of a depressed, mentally unstable old woman. I photographed everything with trembling hands, every document, every email, every macabre plan. I saved the photos to the cloud. I sent them to a secret email address I created that same night. I put everything back exactly as it was, and I waited. The next day, Valerie came to pick up the box. "Thanks, Beatrice," she said with that smile. "You're so helpful." I smiled too, but something had changed in me. The fear was still there, but now it was accompanied by something stronger, the determination to survive. That was last week. And this morning, when I saw her put something in my purse, I knew the plan had officially begun. "Mrs. Beatrice." Officer Miller leaned forward, his voice grave, eyes locked on mine. "Do you have any idea what was in your bag? Do you understand the gravity of this?" I nodded slowly, although I was still struggling to process the sheer scale of what Valerie had done. When I opened my bag in the waiting room at the medical center, after feeling that strange movement, what I found was so impossible I thought I was hallucinating. Wrapped in the dark cloth I saw Valerie stuff in there earlier was a small reptile. A young snake, no longer than my hand, but venomous. I knew it immediately by the markings on its skin, and next to it, carefully placed to look like I had put it there, was a leather-bound journal. The snake was moving slowly, groggy. Later, the police vet explained it had been sedated. Valerie had calculated everything. The reptile had to stay still long enough for me not to notice it leaving the house, but wake up just as I arrived at the doctor's office, a place full of people where my discovery would cause panic. But the true horror was what was inside that journal. It was filled with entries and handwriting that looked exactly like mine. Obsessive, delusional entries about Dr. Ramsey. He has to pay. If I can't have him, no one can. We'll go together. Valerie had investigated my history and found the perfect angle. She wanted to make it look like I, a retired nurse with a fixation, had snapped and planned a murder-suicide at the clinic. "This looks like a premeditated attack, ma'am," Officer Miller said. "Or at least that's what it will look like to a prosecutor. You have medical knowledge, access, and apparently a motive against Dr. Ramsey found in your diary." "I don't have a motive," I said, my voice breaking. "Dr. Ramsey is a saint. I would never hurt anyone, least of all him, and that is not my diary." "Then how do you explain the notes? The snake in your bag?" The officer wasn't being cruel, but he didn't believe me either. Why would he? I was a 64-year-old woman accusing her daughter-in-law of an elaborate murder frame-up. It sounded insane. It sounded exactly like what Valerie had spent months building. The narrative of a senile, paranoid, mentally unstable old lady. Then I remembered. The photos. "I have proof," I said suddenly, reaching for my phone in the bag the police had now confiscated as evidence. "I photographed documents, plans. She was planning to kill me. This is part of something bigger." The officer exchanged another look with his partner. "What kind of documents?" I told them everything. Valerie's debts, the emails with the lawyer, the insurance on Mark, the deadly meds, the list of my routine. The words came out rushed, desperate. I knew how it sounded. I knew every sentence dug me deeper into the role of the delusional old woman. But then I mentioned the box. She left a box at my house 3 weeks ago, with all the documents. If you go to my apartment now, maybe it's still there. She doesn't know I looked in it. Officer Miller stood up. "Wait here." He left the interrogation room, and I heard him talking on the phone in the hallway. 15 minutes later, he came back with a different expression, more serious, more concerned. "Mrs. Beatrice, we just spoke with Dr. Ramsey. He confirmed that you've never made any complaints, that your relationship is excellent. He also told us something interesting. 2 weeks ago, a woman identifying herself as your niece called his office asking about his schedule, his routines, when he was alone at the clinic. My heart beat faster. I don't have any nieces." "That's what we thought. And there's more. We're going to need you to give us access to your apartment, and we're going to need to speak with your daughter-in-law." 3 cruisers arrived at my building in Beacon Hill. Neighbors came out onto their balconies whispering curiously. Mrs. Gable saw me get out of the police car and covered her mouth, horrified. I walked between 2 officers, feeling every stare like a judgment. This was exactly what Valerie had planned, my public humiliation, my social destruction. Even if I managed to prove my innocence, the damage was done. The neighbors would always remember the day the police came for old Beatrice. Officer Miller had the search warrant. We went up to the 5th floor and I fumbled for my keys with shaking hands. But before I could open it, the door at the end of the hall opened violently. It was Mark, my son. He looked unhinged, hair messy, eyes bloodshot. "Mom? What's going on? Valerie called me saying you had been arrested. Why are there police here?" Behind him appeared Valerie, and on her face I saw something that froze my blood. Not surprise, not worry, just a split second of pure fury before her mask slipped back into place. "Oh my God, Beatrice, what did you do?" she said, voice full of fake anguish, running toward me with arms outstretched. The officer stopped her. "Ma'am," Miller said, "are you Valerie Suarez Miller?" She feigned confusion perfectly. "Yes?" "We need to ask you some questions, and we need to search Mrs. Beatrice's apartment." "Search? Why? Mark, what is happening?" Valerie clung to my son's arm. He looked at her. Then he looked at me, completely lost. In that moment, I saw what Valerie had achieved. My son was a stranger. The boy I had raised, who knew every expression on my face, who could read my thoughts just by looking in my eyes, didn't recognize me anymore. He doubted me. And that doubt, planted and carefully cultivated by Valerie over 3 years, was her greatest victory. We entered my apartment. The officers started searching while Valerie protested. "This is abuse. You can't just barge in like this. Mark, call a lawyer." But Mark was paralyzed, staring at me as if I were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Mom, what is going on? Please tell me this is a mistake." "It is a mistake," I whispered, "but not the one you think." Before I could explain, one of the officers came out of the guest room. "We got something." He was carrying a box, the same box Valerie had left 3 weeks ago. My heart skipped a beat with hope. It was still there. She hadn't had time to move it. "That's my box," Valerie said quickly. "I asked Beatrice to hold it for me. It's work material." Her voice was firm, but I noticed the slight tremor in her hands. Officer Miller opened it on the dining room table. The folders, the documents, the pill bottles, everything was still there. "Work material?" Miller asked skeptically. He started pulling out papers one by one. The online casino statements, the debts, the emails. Mark walked over, looking at the documents with growing horror. "What is this, Valerie? $250,000 in debt? Online casinos?" Valerie went pale. "Babe, I can explain." But Miller kept pulling out papers. The conversations about speeding up the process, the notes on my routine, the detailed plan, and finally, the bottles of lethal meds with the list of dosages. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark picked up one of the papers, reading aloud with a broken voice. "The old bat is healthy. We need another approach. What if we show she's mentally unstable?" He looked up at Valerie. eyes full of tears and something deeper, the destruction of everything he thought he knew. The old bat? You mean my mother? Mark, it's not what it looks like. Valerie tried to approach him, but my son recoiled as if she were poisonous. More poisonous than the snake she had put in my bag. That Matthew guy, he forced me. I was desperate with the debts. I was never going to hurt your mother. You have to believe me. Matthew? Mark grabbed another paper. It says here you paid him $20,000 for inheritance consulting services. What does this mean? His voice rose with every word. And this? Life insurance on Mark Miller. Beneficiary Valerie Suarez. $2 million. You took out insurance on me? On my life? Valerie started crying. Perfect tears rolling down her cheeks, perfectly made up. Babe, please, I was scared. The debts, the loan sharks were threatening me. I just wanted to protect us. The insurance was just a precaution. Protect us? Mark let out a bitter laugh that broke my heart. Planning to kill my mother is protecting us? Making her look crazy is protecting us? Sabotaging my work? Ruining my career? Isolating me from everyone is protecting us? He grabbed more papers. Here are the emails you sent from my account. You were the reason I lost the Rosales project. You destroyed my reputation. Why? Because we needed the money, Valerie screamed, and in that scream, her entire mask shattered into pieces. She wasn't the sophisticated, controlled woman anymore. She was a woman on the edge of the abyss, desperate, furious. We needed the money and you couldn't get it. Your mother had all that money sitting there, that apartment, that inheritance, and the only thing she did was exist, occupying space, breathing air she didn't deserve. She's 64 years old, Mark. How much longer was she going to live anyway? I was just accelerating the inevitable. The silence after those words was like the calm before an earthquake. Mark looked at her as if he had never seen her before, as if he had just woken up from a 3-year spell. Are you sick? He whispered. Are you completely sick? No. Valerie straightened up, regaining some of her venomous composure. I'm tired. Tired of poverty disguised as middle class. Tired of pretending everything is fine when we have nothing. I grew up with everything, Mark. Everything. And I lost it. My father lost it all and condemned us to this mediocre misery. When I met you, I thought you were the solution. Successful architect, I thought, but you're just as mediocre as your mother, so conformist, so small. Mark took a step back, as if she had physically punched him. I wanted to hug him, protect him, but I was paralyzed, watching my son's world crumble. Officer Miller intervened. Ms. Suarez, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you. But Valerie couldn't stop. The poison had been accumulating for years, and now it was pouring out uncontrollably. And you know what the funniest part is? It worked. Everyone believed your mother was losing her mind. The neighbors, your friends, even you, Mark, especially you. It was so easy. A comment here, a moved object there. At your age, I'd tell her, and she would shrink like a cockroach. Pathetic. You're both pathetic. Enough, Mark said with a voice I didn't recognize. Cold, deadly. Enough, Valerie. He turned to the officers. I want to file a formal complaint for everything, for the attempted murder of my mother, for fraud, for sabotage, for everything you find in those papers. Valerie laughed, a sharp, hysterical laugh. You? You're going to report me? The man who signed every paper I put in front of him without reading? The man who gave me access to his mother's accounts? The man who helped me isolate her from everyone? You are just as guilty as I am, dear husband. And there was the most painful truth of all. Mark looked at her, then he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw complete devastation. Because Valerie was right. He had been her accomplice, knowingly or not. He had signed papers. He had ignored my calls. He had allowed the isolation. He had doubted me when he should have defended me. My son had chosen his wife over his mother time and time again, and now he had to live with the consequences of those choices. The officers handcuffed Valerie. She didn't resist, but she didn't stop talking either. This doesn't end here. I have contacts, I have lawyers, and I have all the evidence of how Mark participated in this. If I go down, he goes down with me. They dragged her out of the apartment while she continued shouting threats and accusations. Mark and I were left alone in the middle of the chaos. Papers scattered on the table. The evidence of 3 years of manipulation and cruelty. He collapsed onto the sofa, head in his hands. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to apologize for—" His voice cracked, and he started sobbing like he hadn't done since he was a child. I sat next to him. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to scream at him, shake him, ask him how he could have been so blind. But above all, I felt a deep exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of silent pain, of unrequited love, of unrecognized sacrifices. "Not now, Mark," I said finally. I can't do this right now." I stood up from the sofa, feeling every one of my 64 years in my bones. "I need you to leave. I need to be alone." "Mom, please." He reached out for me, but I pulled away. The distance between us, barely 6 feet in that moment, represented years of emotional distance I didn't know if we could ever bridge. "Go, Mark." My voice was firm now. "Go and think about everything that has happened. Think about every moment you chose to believe her instead of me. Think about every call you didn't return, every visit you canceled, every time you looked at me like I was crazy when what I was scared. And when you have really understood the damage that has been done, then maybe we can talk." My son stood up slowly, defeated, destroyed. He walked to the door. He stopped. He looked back. "I love you, Mom. I have always loved you." I didn't answer, because in that moment, love wasn't enough. It had never been enough. When the door closed behind him, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not tears of relief or victory, tears for everything I had lost, for the stolen years, for the relationship with my son that might never recover, for the lost innocence and the destroyed trust. Valerie had failed to kill me, but in a way, she had managed to destroy something equally vital, the family I had worked so hard to build. And the worst part was that I still didn't know if we could rebuild anything from the ruins. The following days were a whirlwind of statements, lawyers, and looks of pity. Valerie was arrested, but her lawyer, a man named Gavin Ferreira with an expensive suit and a shark smile, got her out on bail in less than 48 hours. $50,000 magically appeared from some account nobody knew existed. When I heard she was free, I felt the walls of my apartment closing in on me. The district attorney assigned to the case was a young woman named Danielle Cortland, 35, hair in a tight bun, eyes that had seen too much. She called me into her office 3 days after the arrest. "Mrs. Beatrice," she told me while reviewing the documents, "we have a solid case, but I need you to understand something. The defense is going to play dirty, very dirty." I didn't fully understand her words until the first letter from Valerie's lawyer arrived, a 15-page document where I was formally accused of defamation, slander, procedural fraud, tampering with evidence, and, this is what took my breath away, psychological abuse toward my daughter-in-law for 3 years. According to Valerie's narrative, I was an abusive mother-in-law who had made her life impossible from day one, a resentful and controlling woman who couldn't accept that her son had grown up. "This is absurd," I told Dia Cortland. She nodded with a tired expression. "I know, but it's a common strategy. If they can't deny the facts, they attack the accuser's character. They're going to try to portray you as a vindictive, mentally unstable woman who fabricated this whole story out of jealousy." The campaign started immediately. Valerie's lawyer gave an interview on a morning show. I watched it from my sofa, a cup of tea shaking in my hands. "My client is the victim of a systematic persecution," Ferreira said with a convincing voice. "Mrs. Beatrice Miller has demonstrated patterns of obsessive behavior. We have witnesses who will confirm she made calls at all hours, showed up uninvited, made derogatory comments about my client constantly. Witnesses, Valerie's friends, people willing to lie under oath. A woman named Lucy Vega testified that I had called Valerie a gold digger. False. A man swore he heard me threaten her in a parking lot. A lie. I didn't know him. But the worst came from Mark's cousin, Lauren, whom I had helped pay for college tuition. Aunt B was always very possessive of Mark. She never accepted that any woman was good enough for him. Valerie is a victim in all this. The words hurt more than any physical blow. Mark didn't give interviews. His silence was deafening, D.A. Cortland explained it to me. His testimony is crucial, but legally, he cannot be forced to testify against his wife, and anything he says could incriminate him as an accomplice. Accomplice, I repeated. Could my son go to prison? She sighed. He signed documents that gave Valerie access to your accounts. An aggressive prosecutor could argue that he knew or should have known what was happening. One night, 2 weeks after the arrest, Mark appeared at my door. It was 11 o'clock. He looked devastated. He had lost at least 20 pounds. He had several days of stubble, sunken eyes. "Mom, I need to talk to you." The part of me that had rocked him when he was a baby couldn't turn him away. I let him in. "I moved out," he said. "I left the apartment. I can't be there. Every corner reminds me of her presence." He rubbed his face. "Mom, I went through everything. Every account, every document. I found things I didn't know existed." He pulled out a folder. "She took out loans in my name. 5 loans, $180,000. I never authorized them, but my signature is on all of them. She forged it. It all went to the casinos." He paused. "The life insurance she took out on me. She took it out right after my car accident. Remember? I hit a pole. I thought it was bad luck. Now I wonder if she tampered with something, if she loosened the brakes." His voice broke. "She tried to kill me too, didn't she?" I didn't know what to say. Mark continued through tears. "And the worst part is that I failed you. Every time she insulted you and I said nothing, every time I canceled our lunches, every time I looked at you with suspicion. God, Mom, how could I be so blind?" "Love is blind," I said softly. Mark shook his head. "That wasn't love. It was like being under a spell. She knew exactly what to say, when to pull away so I would chase her. And every time I tried to get close to you, she made me feel guilty. Your mother doesn't accept me. Your mother doesn't want you to be happy." And I believed every word. Silence. Then Mark asked, "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" I looked at him. My son, the man who had broken my heart without realizing it. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I want to say yes, but I don't know if I can trust you again." Mark nodded, accepting the blow. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm going to testify against her. I don't care about self-incrimination. I'm going to tell everything." "Did you ever suspect?" I asked him. He closed his eyes. "Yes. Weird medications she said were for art projects. When she went through your purse looking for mints, whispered calls. But I didn't want to see it, because seeing it would mean admitting I had married a monster." Before leaving, he added, "Valerie's lawyer contacted me. He offered me a deal. If I say that you were hostile, that you fabricated evidence, he'll ensure I'm not prosecuted." He turned to me with determination. I told him to go to hell. I stayed awake thinking about the DA's question. How far is she willing to go to win this case? Because winning meant exposing every sordid detail in public. It meant Mark reliving 3 years of manipulation in front of judges and cameras. It meant destroying whatever privacy we had left. The answer arrived 3 days later. "Beatrice, come immediately. There's been a development," Cortland said over the phone. When I arrived, 2 detectives were waiting. "We've been investigating Valerie more thoroughly. You aren't her first victim." They showed me files. 7 years ago, an elderly woman named Eleanor Fields had died under suspicious circumstances, apparent suicide by overdose. Mrs. Fields had changed her will 2 weeks prior, leaving everything to her beloved niece, Valerie Suarez, a niece with no blood ties who had been her caregiver for a year. "Did she kill that woman?" I asked, choked up. Cortland nodded. "We can't prove it definitively, but the parallels are disturbing. Same strategy, gain trust, isolate the victim, build a narrative of mental deterioration." She leaned in. "Beatrice, if you drop the charges, Valerie walks free, and she will find another victim, and next time, she might succeed." It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about preventing someone else from suffering, about stopping a predator. "What do you need from me?" The DA smiled. "I need you to be strong, to tell your story, all of it, no matter how painful it is, and to trust that the system can do the right thing." That night, I called Mark. "We are going to fight. We are going to fight with everything we have, and we are going to win, not for revenge, but because it is the right thing to do." My son let out a sigh of relief and terror. "I'm with you, Mom. This time, I am completely with you." The legal battle was about to begin, and I was ready, no matter the cost. Dear friend who has accompanied me to the end of this story, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being present, for listening to every word, for letting me share this journey full of pain, truth, and learning. I know this story has stirred something inside you. Maybe it made you think about your own family relationships, the people you trust, the decisions that define your life. That is exactly what I aim for, that you reflect, that you learn, that you see with more clarity the signs we sometimes ignore. We often think dignity is something we can compromise for love, but true love never asks you to sacrifice your dignity. Remember that boundaries are not walls to shut people out, but gates to protect your peace. This was a fictional story, but the pain and the lessons within it are drawn from the very real fabric of everyday life. See you in the next story.